Welcome to HCA Talks Health. I'm Zina Leroux, and as a guest today, we have Dr. Colette Reynolds. She's a psychologist, a mum, and founder of Growing Healthy Eaters. Welcome, Colette. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited too.
I want to start with your company called Growing Healthy Eaters. So tell us more about this. When did you start the company, and what exactly was your goal or your mission at first?
Okay, so I started back in 2017, and it was after I became a mum myself. I have two boys, and I was always into eating well, fueling my body well. I like to eat variety, balance, so on. And then I realized, I suppose, that when you have little ones and you're responsible for them, that feeding them isn't always so straightforward. So with my eldest boy in particular, I had some challenges. Now he ate a variety. I wouldn't ever class him as a fussy eater, but he was very particular about certain things he'd eat and certain things he wouldn't. So he wouldn't eat like soft textures. So he went off things like cooked porridge. And he was great, as a baby, he would eat all that. And it actually got to the point where he'd get upset if I offered him foods like this. I was like, but he used to eat this. And, he wouldn't eat kind of mixed foods. We say like dinner, something like a curry, for example, that had a number of pieces in it. And, he'd eat, handfuls of veg. And, so he was a good eater. But I was like, this isn't in line with what we're eating. And he is a bit more limited.
Yeah.
So I do want to see what I can do. So I obviously was offering it to him, and I was changing up things, and I was doing all the things that they recommend, keep persisting and being positive, no pressure, but it still wasn't making a difference. So I suppose I'm the kind of person sometimes I'm like, okay, if I have a challenge, let's not just accept this, let's see, maybe is there someone out there who can help me, because I'm not really getting to the point where I want to be.
Yeah.
So I looked, of course, online. What do you do when you have a problem? And, if you don't ask someone, you look online. And I didn't really see anyone who was kind of specializing in this, which is that kids are kind of rigid and, avoid certain textures or only want certain foods and don't want to eat other foods, and they may be upset and so on. So I kind of said, okay. And just even in talking to people, at the playground, and, when you're as a mom, you just talk about these things, of course, when you're waiting for kids to play and whatever. I said, there's a lot of people challenged actually with their kids eating to some degree. Now there's a continuum, you might have a little bit of challenge or you might have a lot, but it's very common and people aren't sure what to do about it. So, you hear all the time, oh, I wish my kids would eat more veg, or, I'd love if they, would eat the dinner, or they weren't upset with eating the dinner. So I decided I would go back and train as a nutrition and health coach and apply my psychology kind of training to see could I help other people. And that's how I set up Growing Healthy Eaters.
Great. So you really identified that gap. And I am quite surprised that there wasn't anything or any services to address that, because I agree, it's a huge issue.
Yes.
And often clients that I see as a health coach, they would tell me that they're frustrated because their kids are only eating spaghetti and Cocoa Pops. So I don't know if you have that brand in the UK.
We have Cocoa Pops here, and we've lots of variations of it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So not the best.
Oreos lately, or Kit Kat or something, and I'm like, that's dessert. So sorry, just to interrupt you there for a little bit, because I might forget. So there's lots of people, I suppose, who help parents, they're parent coaches, but they don't specialize kind of in, we'll say, fussy eating. Or there's lots of people who help lots of people, and that's good, they have lots of general skills, I'm sure, but I was thinking, I have a lot of those skills myself. I'm looking for a kind of specialist in this area. And in Ireland, where I'm based, there was no one really specializing in fussy eating. And I thought that's really the gap I identified, because that's, I suppose, the big reason people come to me. Lots of people want to improve their kids' eating. They are saying, oh, I prefer if they ate this and whatever. But it's I suppose, the extreme of that, along the continuum, is the fussy eating, where there's a lot of stress, or the kids' diets are very limited. There is concern about their development, maybe future, if not present. There's there's a lot going on, we'll say, with the fussy eating, and that's, I suppose, where people are like, okay, I need help with this now at this stage.
Okay. So let's go back to that example. So I'm sure you get this quite often, and as I said, I do too. But if someone tells you, oh, I don't know what to do, my kid only eats spaghetti and Cocoa Pops, and they tend to throw a tantrum when they don't get that. They don't want anything else. So how
Yes.
would you approach that? What are some of the principles that you use in your approach?
So I suppose I look obviously at not only what we feed our kids, and what feeds into that is how we feed them. So there
Yes.
probably isn't as much, there's loads of cookbooks out there, and there's loads of blogs, and I mean there's just huge amounts, and some of it is brilliant about, hide the spinach in this, or this is a nicer way of maybe getting your kid to eat fish or whatever. And that's useful, but a lot of people are doing that. They're doing
Mm,
the baby-led weaning books and all this. But the missing piece is, how do we actually, get them on board if
mm,
presumably the parents aren't just eating Cocoa Pops and spaghetti. So I think the first principle that's really important, no matter where your child lies on this continuum of being a little fussy, more fussy, and extremely fussy, is to meet them where they are. And
mm,
now we probably all think we're doing this, but actually, I don't know if we really are. And the evidence I would see just from doing this for the last 8 years, even the free calls I offer, when I kind of offer a discovery call first, and I say, tell me about the challenges, what's happening in your house, and then I can tell you if I can help you. And
mm,
a lot of it is that we aren't meeting our children where they are. So we might,
mm.
for example, offer peas on their plate because we want them to eat peas for dinner, and the rest of us are eating peas. And we think, well, peas are sweet corn, they're
Yeah.
not that bad. It's not like sprouts or something. Um, and the child might think, Mammy doesn't have a clue. I'm not even going to touch them. Does she
Mm,
realize I would die rather than eat peas, or whatever extreme, So there's, I suppose, the child doesn't feel understood. They're like, oh,
mm,
Mammy's on a different planet. That's never
mm,
going to happen. So
mm,
that's where the upset can come in, because they feel, you live with me, you see what I eat every day. Why are you giving me peas? That's never going to happen,
yeah.
So we need to build trust. So I would, if you're in this situation where you're offering something like peas or whatever it is that's making your child upset, even though it's a reasonable food, you think it's probably not reasonable to them. So I would take a break from offering that food on the plate.
Mm,
Okay,
mhm,
because A, it's causing upset, and food should never cause upset. That would
mhm,
be my big principle. You like food, you don't, you eat, you don't, whatever the case is, but it shouldn't be upsetting. Now, you don't have to love everything, or you don't have to love even eating. Some kids don't, or adults, but it shouldn't be so negative. And that's the
mm,
problem in a lot of houses. It gets
mm,
to that point because I
mm,
suppose we get desperate, and we don't know what else to do. So we're bribing kids sometimes, or we're doing things that we don't want to, but we think this is the only way. So there is a
mm,
better way, I'd like to say.
mhm,
So not offering kind of foods that are upsetting them, because we're asking them to eat it. Now, I knew a lot less about this, obviously, years ago when I had my own boys when they were younger. And I used to say to them, I put whatever, like peas or whatever it was on the plate. Like my second, for example, was very poor with veg. At one stage, he would only eat one type of cooked veg, peppers. And again, we eat lots of veg. So I was like, this isn't right, or this isn't the way it should be. So I would say to him, you don't have to eat it, but you have to taste it. So I assumed it was okay for him to taste, that he was willing to do that, or he was kind of, thought that was okay. But he
mm.
might want to even put the pea in his mouth. So, it's a big ask.
Yeah.
So sometimes what we can do instead is to food explore away from the eating time or table. So if we want our child to eat a bigger variety of cereals, for example, healthier ones or not chocolatey ones, we can get them on board with exploring the properties of these cereals. Okay, so this is a chocolate granola, for example. It's similar to what they eat, but it's a little bit different. So we want to change their mind about different foods. So they're kind of
Mm,
like, oh, I only eat this. I only eat Cocoa Pops, and nothing else is okay. It's yuck, or it's
mm,
weird, or I'm not sure. I might have to eat it. These are all the obstacles presumably children are thinking of, even unconsciously. They might
mm,
be able to even verbalize this or know this, but there's some reason why they won't try it,
yeah.
or why they're getting upset.
Mm,
So if we can get them to explore it without asking them to eat it, let's squash the chocolate granola. It's
Yeah.
similar, as I said, to what they're eating. It's not like Brussels sprouts where it's like so different. And you can say, well, how is it similar to Cocoa Pops? Or, it might be somewhat similar in terms of, it's chocolatey or it's sweet or whatever, or crunchy or whatever. So that's one way I think that really helps to expand a child's eating if they're not willing to accept it on the plate or even beside the plate or, on the table, because that's probably too much for them right now. We need to break it down further.
Okay. So coming back to the peas, so if they're not keen to have that, or in some cases no veg at all, and we are asking them to maybe explore and bring a few other options to the table, um, but still they just don't like the idea of vegetables. So I think that's where some parents are becoming quite concerned because they find, oh my gosh, my kid isn't getting any veggies into their bodies. And of course, they need it. It's healthy, right? So I guess there's this probably a very fine line between parents who want the best for their kids. We want our kids to be healthy and get optimal nourishment, but we don't want to harm their relationship with food by doing that, because I've often had that as well with clients telling me that their parents forced them to eat certain things or not have sugar or whatever, and that ended up backfiring, creating a negative relationship with food or even awakening like a rebellious streak. So how can we approach that?
Yes. So definitely over restriction can be a problem where we're like, oh, you only can have one biscuit or whatever, because the kid is thinking, I'll give anything to eat all the biscuits. And sometimes the more we say don't do something, the more they want to do it. So even think of ourselves. Let's say, as an example, I'm going to this event, in a month's time, and I'm like, okay, I want to lose weight. So I'm not going to eat any chocolate. I'm not going to eat any bread. What's the most thing I want to eat then? Because I've
Exactly.
told myself, oh, no
Yeah.
chocolate. Well, if I said, okay, Colette, you can have some chocolate every day, but less, or, some bread or whatever, so kind of extremes aren't good.
Yeah.
And the other thing I suppose is that children want to have a sense of control. So
Mhm.
often fussy eating will start when they're a toddler because they want to be the boss of everything. And food is one thing, if you know anything about toddlers, everyone knows this. So food is one way of asserting their independence and saying, no, I don't want to do what mommy tells me. Even if the pee isn't the problem or whatever it is. They're like, no,
Mhm.
I'm going to do the opposite. She says, eat it. I go, no, because I'm the boss. So one way of getting around this is to offer a greater sense of control, because at the end of the day, really, they are in control. We shouldn't want to force feed them because that's not really a good idea. I know, again, that does happen in houses, but like, what do we do? Physically open their mouth and put the food in? I mean, that's
Mhm.
not good, definitely long term and even short
Mhm.
term. So we want to avoid that if possible. So what we want to do is give them a greater sense of control. So even very simple things like choices. So let's say there's Cocoa Pops and some other chocolate granola, as an example, cereals that they like to eat in the morning. So if you say, which would you like, or get them to, point at it, whatever age they are, and they pick one of them, they're more likely to eat that. And they think they're the boss because they've made the end decision. While you're saying, well, that's all the cereal we have in the house, for example. You have to eat this. There's nothing else. In your head, you don't need to say that to
Mhm.
them. So that works really well because we get rid of these battles over food. So
Mhm.
if you offer them the two choice, they pick one and then they don't eat it, will you say, well, that's what you picked, or that's what's on offer now? And that's
Mhm.
okay. You don't have to eat. So sometimes even saying that to a child, where you're, because a lot of children are very conscious, mammy, who's usually doing the feeding or whoever it is, will do anything to get me to eat something, for example, before bed, because
Mhm.
no one wants their kid to go to bed hungry. That's not right either. But they take advantage of this, even from a young age, as they do, because children are here to challenge us. And that's their role. So, unfortunately, that's part of parenting and caregiving. So, they're thinking, okay, I don't really like the dinner that's offered. So, let's say there's going to be toast, or I know if I say I'm hungry in a while before, after dinner and before bed, I'll get something really nice to eat, like toast or whatever, and I can fill up on that. So we want to prevent that happening. So if we
Mhm.
gave a choice and offered something reasonable for dinner, we'd have a more likelihood of them eating it. Then they don't
Mhm.
get into the habit of filling up on a lot before bed, which isn't good, in terms of digestion, but also they can skip the dinner. And they get
Mm.
into this habit, no, I know I'll hold out now and sure I'll get something much better in a little while. So definitely the choices. And I would not say to a kid, or I don't think it's the best idea to say, what do you want to eat? Because that's very overwhelming for some. And
Mm.
it also may result in, I'll have ice cream all the time. So it
Yeah.
might be the same food or it might be the most nutritious. So let's structure things and parent and say, okay, there's these two cereals, for example, and which one do you want? And let's go with that.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess there shouldn't be any backsliding then, or is that okay? Like if
So
they say,
backsliding is an alternative. That's not a term I'm used to. Yeah. So if you don't eat this, you can have something else. The short order cup, they call it as well. Yeah. Yeah. So I would definitely say that. So in terms of back to that example of the choices, and if they make a choice and then they go, oh, I don't want this, but I want a third option. You're saying, so what you could say is, well, this is what's available right now. I always say, well, this isn't a restaurant. You
mm,
don't have 10 options like when you eat out or
yeah,
whatever. We have these two options. And if you know in your head there's something that they usually eat, well, then it's a reasonable expectation that if they're hungry, they will eat it. You're not asking
mm,
them to eat a bowl of sprouts or something. That's
yeah,
really is food, but to them probably isn't. To
yeah,
us it is.
yeah.
So have I lost my train of thought? Oh yeah, so the options, yeah. So I wouldn't offer a third option. I would say, you had the third option. So let's say they're looking for the pasta, let's say. It might be breakfast time, but whatever. And pasta isn't one of the two options. So you can say, well, remember you had pasta yesterday for dinner and you can have it again tomorrow. So remind them when they had it. It's a
Yeah.
no just for now, and you'll have it again at this time so that, they can be sure, yes, it's just a temporary no. But you're giving the idea that, let's say they always want to eat pasta for dinner. You're giving the idea that we don't eat our favorite foods all the time.
Yeah.
That's a
Mm,
really, really important message for,
mm,
I think, parents and around the whole feeding thing. Because, a kid could watch the same cartoon millions of times or whatever, hundreds of times, and it's not going to cause any harm in terms of, just repetition. But actually, eating our favorite foods all the time is usually a very limited list.
mm,
And we all have our favorites, and that's fine. But if we only eat that, we can get really tired of eating them because we have to eat them so often.
mm-hmm.
And that's actually why fussy eating or picky eating or selective eating or any of that can get worse over time. So this idea
Mm,
that it'll just improve doesn't for lots of kids. There's research to say that it doesn't. And actually doesn't even stay the same. It gets worse. So to be
mm-hmm.
aware that if it's limited, it could get actually more limited.
Mm. So it's not a great strategy as a parent to just let it go and say, oh, it will get better over time. I'm not going to make a fuss over this. And yes, you shouldn't probably, but there are other strategies that
Yes.
could be beneficial when you intervene early enough. Yeah.
Yes. Well, really, at any stage, I would see parents of children up to 12. I always say, because people will ask me that, is it too late? They've been like
Mm,
this for 10 years and are they just like this? And I can't even remember when they're of age or whatever. So I
mm,
would say it's better to intervene than not. Because it's like, let's take an example. If a child is struggling with reading, we would never say, let's say, they're just not getting it compared to the others in the class, which happens. And there's whatever reasons, but we would never say, oh, just leave it. The teacher would be, telling us, oh, do this at home. And, they probably have help possibly in school and they might have someone taking them out, one to
mm,
one or whatever. So why do we think eating is so automatic? And if a child is challenged with eating a variety or eating nutritious foods or whatever it is, why do we just leave it?
mm,
And hope someday it'll get better. You're taking a chance if you're leaving it. And the
yeah.
chance may be that it actually stays the same, which probably isn't great if you're already challenged, but it also could get worse.
Yes, I hear you. Okay, so I like that idea of what you were saying. When we give them options or choice, then it offers a sense of control, right? Because they want to be the boss. That's part of being a toddler. And I guess that also creates some sense of empowerment around I can choose what I put into my body to a certain degree, right? And I can listen to my own body and I can respond to what I like or what I don't like. So is that tied in any way to raising an intuitive eater? Is that part of the principles that helps you raise an intuitive eater? Mm.
Absolutely. So really intuitive eating, I think if I was to instill it down to one or two sentences, it's about eating in response to our hunger. If we're hungry, we eat more. Some days, like toddlers have very variable appetites. So they could eat two dinners, let's say, instead of one, and then there's other times when we're not hungry and really should we eat? So if we're bored or if we're sad or frustrated or, should we really eat? That might make us feel better a little
Mm.
bit maybe at that time, but that's not going to solve the problem. And
Mm.
that's maybe also preventing us developing better coping mechanisms. So if we're sad a lot, we need to find the reason for that, or can we cope if it's something we can't, control? Can we change our thinking and stuff? There's better ways than just eating. Eating's like
Yeah.
putting a little plaster on it and hoping, it'll go away, but it's, some thing that isn't going to go away with a plaster. So yes, raising intuitive eating eaters is really important in a sense because we as adults are external or whoever's feeding our kids and we don't know, for example, how hungry they are. Kids go through growth spurts, for example. It's different than an adult, I think, who has a more steady
Mm.
appetite. Like I generally would eat around the same amount every day.
Yeah.
So, we can't always say, oh, it's we'll say dinner time now, you should eat because, the rest of us are eating. If a child says they're not hungry or indicates they're not interested, well, then I wouldn't force them. And, it's different if they're looking for, let's say, ice cream instead of the dinner. That's, that's a different story. That's,
Yeah.
I want ice cream. But if they say, I'm not hungry or I don't want to eat, well, then why would you force them? Because that's
Mm.
kind of going against their body. So we do need to start looking at teaching our kids from a young age, listen to your body. What's it saying? So
Mm.
let's say you go to a party or some kind of buffet situation and there's loads of food and our child eats and eats and eats too much and they get sick or else they, feel unwell, they pain their tummy. That's actually a really good learning point where, they're like, you can talk about that again and say, well, actually, maybe it's nice to eat all these things, but if we eat a little bit less, we'd still enjoy it more and we wouldn't feel sick. And, you don't want to do
Mm.
that or don't want to have a pain
Mm.
in your belly. So you're making that connection because in a lot of cases, we say that a lot. Don't eat so much that you get sick. Stop eating now. And,
Mm.
especially the kind of, chocolate and those kind of, we say desserts. And kids are probably thinking, that never happened to me. That's never going to happen. I can keep going all day long. But if actually they experience that, they get it. Well,
Mm.
we could say that 100 times and they're like, yeah, mommy's just saying that. But,
Mm.
so it's important sometimes, I suppose, to experience that. So we have to trust that sometimes if that happens, then, it's a learning point and we can move on. It's not the
Mm.
end of the world.
Yeah, and to let go in that moment for them to experience that for themselves instead of trying to control them at the party. You're only going to have one or two, and then they won't learn that for
Yes.
themselves. So I think that's powerful.
So, unfortunately, as parents, we want to control everything, but we also have to let them learn.
Yeah.
And that means making mistakes. And often we
Mm.
learn most from making a mistake. Let's say where you eat so much we call it a mistake, and you feel sick or you get sick. That'll be a more powerful learning point than anything ever again. And we
Mm.
probably won't need to say it. Once they make that connection, they'll go, oh, yeah, I remember that. I don't
Mm.
let that happen again.
Exactly. Mm. So you mentioned that respond to or learn them or teach them to respond to, I mean, their own hunger. So if they're not necessarily hungry at dinner time, we're not going to force them. But what about the opposite when they are not feeling hungry, but they feel like having something because they
Okay.
want an ice cream or they want a chocolate? It's not connected to hunger. How would you respond to that?
So I think I like to simplify things, and this is my view of it. So we really should eat when we're physically hungry,
Yeah.
and we shouldn't eat otherwise because there's always some reason to eat if it's not hunger. We're sad, we're mad, we're happy, there's a range of emotions there. But I think this point is really important. So if usually we start eating when we're hungry, and then there's a change in status. We feel more satisfied, we feel more full, and then we know kind of when to stop. Because how do you know when to stop otherwise? You see, if you start when you're not really hungry, there's no change in status. So, unless you get, feel very full or kind of bursting. So I think in terms of the amount we eat, um, And when we should eat, like if our body, let's say you've eaten a big Christmas dinner and there's still ice cream, whatever there, you're thinking, oh, that's nice, I'd like to have it, But like, why would you force it down kind of in a way and kind of put your body under stress because it's trying to deal with this big Christmas dinner? You can have it in a little while when you've digested it. So I
Mm.
do feel that we should eat really when we're hungry
Yeah.
only. Now, there are exceptions. We're not robots, our children aren't. But let's say, as an example, let's say we were having an activity like swimming, and that kind of was happening at dinner time, let's say. So we know if we don't eat, or our kids don't eat before the swimming, that they'll be extra kind of too hungry afterwards, and we don't want that. So we might say, okay, I know you're not that hungry, but we'll have something small now. And, then you're not going to be starving by the time we get food after the swimming, for example. So generally speaking, if you can, it's a good principle to go by, but there will be exceptions
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, of course. So what comes to mind for me now is the whole nature versus nurture debate. So thinking about fussy eaters. So everything we've talked about so far makes me think, do you find that a kid in its nature is a fussy eater? They are born a fussy eater, or are they actually things that parents do or the environment that we create that creates fussy eaters?
So I don't think kids are naturally fussy, but there's some points or factors that increase the likelihood of fussy eating. So for example,
Mm.
kids want to just eat their favorite foods. Most
Yeah.
adults kind of know that's not a good idea. They don't mind kind of the same repetition, if it's especially for kids who like, I suppose structure, or they like to know what, predictability. They often will have the exact same food over and over. So there are certain things, I suppose, that make it more likely that a child is fussy eater. What I would say is genetically, probably we are as children aren't, most of us as children, I think, aren't really adventurous with food.
Mm.
That's actually what I'd say more. We have to learn that,
Yeah.
that there's different textures, different, and
Mm.
to tolerate that or get to like them. That's, I
Mm.
think, more the thing. And the environment really is effective there, or really influential what we do as parents. So let's
Mm.
say, I want my child to eat salad, but I don't eat salad. So,
Mm.
I'm giving them salad. And then they come to a point or whatever age, they're like, but why do I eat salad? Because you don't. So, that's the role modeling, for example, but also our attitude, to eating, like again, talking about things like I talked about the favorite foods, but things like, how, like the treats and stuff, let's say, or the chocolate. How do we know kind of children might think automatically, oh, sure, I want to eat chocolate all the time. So again, we don't eat that all the time because you might get tired of it. But I also would get parents to talk to their kids around things like, growing foods. So we eat different types of foods. I don't like to say anything is, junk or full of sugar or whatever. That's very negative. And it also might, increase the likelihood of, a negative relationship, particularly later. So I talk about growing foods. There's, your pasta, whatever it is they eat, or your fruit, veg, whatever. And they give us, now you might want to use that word, but it's something, they give us superpowers, they, fuel us, they, whatever works for your child. And that's why we eat them most of the time. And then, of course, there's other foods like your chocolate or your Cocoa Pops or whatever. And they're nice to eat, but they don't have the same powers. They don't have this, power to grow or to run faster at soccer or whatever it is. So that's why we eat them less. So it's not about not eating any food per se. If you're looking at, oh, I shouldn't eat that because that's unhealthy. It's more, and demonizing food, it's more about, oh, we eat foods in different quantities and different frequencies. So we eat growing foods every day, for example, and then we might eat our chocolate once a day or
Yeah.
whatever, depending
Yeah.
on the house. So those kind of messages I think are important
Yeah.
because the environment is set up that there's food everywhere. Most of us have food in our kitchen all the time. You go into a shop and there's walls of temptation. So it's a difficult environment we live in. And
Mm.
people are like snacking all the time and or bring a snack with me and eating on the go because having time. And so, we do live in a more challenging environment than we used to. So we have to be,
Mm.
I suppose, a little bit more conscious of how do we kind of, have a bit of balance in that? How do we have the nutrition? How do we have the
Yeah.
variety?
And it's like a skill that needs to be developed, as you mentioned earlier, because kids aren't necessarily naturally um, curious about food, as you said. They don't want to necessarily explore in that way. So it is something that parents need to introduce kids to. But
Practice,
what
I would
are,
say.
mm,
Like a skill, sorry. So any skill, most of us will, have that expression, the practice makes better. So it's like riding a bike or learning a language. It doesn't happen automatically. Yet sometimes we think, oh, they should be good eaters because we are. Generally, the parents I see, would be good eaters and their kids aren't. That's the difference is why they come to me. So yes, practice is important. And that could, you could be practicing soccer for a long time before you get, better. So the same thing
exactly,
with, yeah, exploring
exactly.
food.
Yeah. So I know we've touched on quite a few things, but what are some of the mistakes that parents tend to make when it comes to trying to get their kids to eat, just in general? So we've talked about not meeting them where they're at, forcing them to eat something when they don't like it. Anything else that we didn't touch on that you think is important? The mistakes, and I'm saying this without any judgment. I know parents are really trying to do their best in most circumstances. So, but what are some of the things that parents could do better?
I think, talking, as I said, about the foods, the growing foods, all that, the favorite foods, we need to kind of think about our attitude to, we'll say, new foods. So instead of, so some kids are kind of afraid, that's the word parents use, to touch a new food or, mind to taste it or to eat it. So we need to have, I suppose, a better culture of, what's the worst that could happen if you try it? And let's try it and see what it's like, or let's touch it even, whatever stage they're at. That's important, I think, because otherwise it can get down to this limited list again. Oh, and I see kids who only eat one type of cracker or one shape of pasta. And the other pasta is exactly the same taste and texture and everything, but it's actually just a different shape. So kids can get very rigid, particularly, and you see it also with teenagers and adults. It's
Yeah,
not just exclusive to kids
yeah,
that, it's this, oh, I only eat this, but like there's a whole world of food out there. Now, you don't have to eat everything, obviously, but the variety is really important. The research will say, in terms of gut health, the more variety you can eat, the better in terms of getting more nutrition. I'd also say in terms of not getting tired of it. And then, of course, for your gut health, you're fueling, lots of different things in your gut rather than just always eating the one cereal, for example.
yeah, exactly. So at what age can parents start using this approach? When do you typically encourage them to help develop healthy, happy eaters?
I would say really once you establish weaning and start solid foods, it's
Okay.
better to start with good habits than wait for very bad habits to, I suppose,
Mm,
get very established. Like that, example of a 12-year-old, if a parent comes to me, they're like, is it possible that this can change? It's so long. And that habit is so ingrained. It's like, well, this is just what they do. You'd hear people say, well, my child only eats chicken nuggets for dinner. That's just the way it is.
yeah.
And, because it's like the reading, just because they're a certain way doesn't mean they can't be another way if we put in different help. So it's
Mm,
like, I suppose, finding the right key to unlock, a door. If we haven't found the right key so far, well, then maybe we need to look for a different key because you can
mm,
definitely, in a lot of cases, the most of the children I help, they don't have any other issues. They just are very particular about food. And that's where I suppose the psychology comes in. We need to change their mind about trying new foods because often that's the biggest reason people will come to me
mm,
for a limited diet and they're concerned and so on. But the children, they can't get their children to try a new food. And if you can't get your child to try a new food, you're so far away from getting them to eat it,
mm,
unfortunately.
mm. And that's exactly what you support parents with, right?
Yeah.
So if someone listening today thinking, oh, I need you, Dr. Colette, I need you. How do they reach out to you and what type of options do you offer to support parents?
So I just let people go to the website. It's growinghealthyeaters.ie. And I would offer mainly personalized support. I suppose the people that come to me, they have tried lots of things. They may have been to someone else, a different type of practitioner. They may have been dismissed by someone like a GP. Ash, they're growing, they're fine, this idea. So they're often looking for personalized support. Now I do offer courses as well and so on. But the personalized support will start exactly where your child is, and then we'll meet them where they are. We'll keep it as positive as possible, but we'll start challenging them a little bit, not to overwhelm them, but to start seeing things a little different. And that may be something like, just one example. I do lots of things when I talk about kind of building a foundation first before we start introducing new foods. So we might make the same food look different. So we might cut up the spaghetti so it doesn't always look the same. So we're giving the idea that actually it looks different, still the same taste and texture and nutrition, everything, but it is now still okay. So it's the fear of difference. It's that, oh, what if I don't like it? It's all this can just spiral. And then it's like, no, I don't eat that. No, I don't like it. Take it away. No, or to get upset or whatever. And parents are like, oh, I can't give them that because that makes them upset, or, they won't try it and so on.
That's about introducing small steps to
Yes,
expand their
absolutely.
mind and to try new things. Yeah.
And changing their mindset. I think, like, I'm the only psychologist in Ireland who does this. Lots of people will come from a different background in terms of what do we give them to eat. And that's obviously, I do advise a bit on that, but it's
Yeah.
more about how do we get them on board with what the rest of the family are eating.
Oh, and that's crucial. Thank
Yeah.
you. So, is there maybe one last thing that you want to leave our listeners with today before we end off?
So I suppose I'd like to just go back to something. As I said, most people come to me about fussy eating, and there's a lot of myths out there. And are they bad enough? Are they too old? Are they, too young? Whatever. So there's a definition I really like of fussy eating where it talks about if it's severe enough that it's affecting the child or the parent-child relationship, then maybe what you're doing isn't working and you've tried it for a while, then maybe you need a different approach. Fussy eating is quite actually common. Most of us aren't going to proclaim, oh, my child only eats Cocoa Pops, It's different than if they want a race or something. We
Yeah.
don't talk about it, so probably the levels are much higher than actually the research is saying. So it is a common problem, but should it be just left like that? Obviously, I feel it shouldn't. There is a better way. There's lots of things we can do. And as I said, we do it in such a gradual, positive way. It's doable for you to implement as a parent as well. And obviously for your child to accept.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think there's lots of practical tips here, and I'm sure it will, without doubt, help many parents to navigate the challenges of raising healthy, happy eaters. But we truly appreciate your time, and we're really grateful for the opportunity to learn from you. So thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat to you.
If you have a passion for health and wellness, and you would like to make a difference in the lives of others and discover a new rewarding career in health and well-being coaching, visit www.healthcoachesacademy.com to find out more.